Hello, this is Pastor Don Long, and here we are on our Jewish Roots broadcast. Today I want to have a little bit of a teaching lesson. I'm going to use the blackboard for some example for you of things so the concepts we're talking about can be clearly identified. I want to talk about a hypothetical two countries. Sometimes when we use the name of Israel or the name of Palestine or Hamas or Hezbollah, we get all different kinds of preconception. So for a moment, bear with me. Let's talk about country A and country B. Now, I want to admit right up front that the whole concept for today's presentation comes from one that was given by Dennis Prager, Praeger. I suggest you Google him, look up Prager University, for example. He's a commentator, just got some really great values that he talks about. And this illustration comes out of one of his recent editorials that he was writing about. I want to talk about country A and country B, and I want to give you a description of each country because we want to talk about a moral difference in countries in the world. So the first thing for country A is that it wants to destroy country B. Its goal in life. Country A makes no bones about it. Its goal in life is to destroy country B. In fact, if you look at the charter of country A, it says our goal is to ensure that country B is totally eradicated. Something you might think that would come out of Star Wars or something of the future, but that's what country A believes. Secondly, in order to accomplish this, what country A does is they send missiles into country B. Their goal is to destroy country B, and so they are trying to accomplish this. They're going to send missiles into country B. And the goal of sending the missiles, by the way, is to kill as many civilians as they can. So they don't aim their missiles at military installations. They really believe that what they're going to do is they're going to start killing civilians in the cities, and that's going to demoralize country B, and maybe the people get up and leave or whatever. But that is their goal. A fourth thing we know about country A is that it tortures political opponents. Actually, tortures and execute, but let's put tortures opponents. This is a policy that they follow, that they're going to torture their opponents, and it's just a practice that goes on in their country. We can add some other things to country A. There's no religious freedom. No religious freedom. So if you are in country A, you practice another religion at your own peril. In fact, it has no political freedom. It has no freedom of the press. So things that, for example, we in America take as our amendment rights in the first 10 amendments, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to gather, freedom of religion. Country A does not particularly believe those things. Another one we can add here, let me go up here, is that they violently oppose gays. In other words, if they find out that you're gay, they're very likely to murder you, execute you, or that is their policy as a country. We can also know about country A, it's a theocracy. A theocracy. Now, what do I mean by a theocracy? It means it is ruled by religious people. The religious leaders of the country are the ones that are driving the country itself. Another one I would like to add is its education. In its education, It uses education to attack country B. In other words, its education system from kindergarten all the way through is filled with examples and rhetoric that demean the citizens of country B, put down the citizens of country B, applaud the destruction of country B. Even in their children's TV programs, they have songs about the glory of killing the people who live in country B. So education from kindergarten all the way through is focused against country B. I might add that country A has a rating by Freedom House in the year 2013. That's an organization that reports on freedom in the world. And they gave country A rating of 6. By the way, 7 is the worst possible. So country A ranks 6th in freedom, 6th in civil liberties, and 6th in political rights. It's on the losing end of freedom. Now, let's compare that with country B. Country B recognizes country A's right to exist. Remember, country A does not recognize a country B, even has a right to be there. Country B, however, recognizes that country A has a right to exist. Country B has never started a war with country A. It has never decided to wipe out country A. So it's not that country B hasn't had wars with country A, but it never started a war. It has never said we want to destroy country A, we want to wipe out its citizens and dedicate themselves to do that. Thirdly, country A has never targeted citizens. So let me put this as never targeted civilians. Now remember, we're comparing country A, which intends to kill civilians, and country B, which makes a policy never to target civilians. If you look at domestic political scene, in country B includes in their leadership people who are very favorable of country A. In fact, in this country, all political parties can have a right to speak, and even those who want to criticize the policies of country B. If you live in country B, you could be elected to the parliament of country B. Over here, there is no political freedom like that. If you speak out against country A, you're likely to be executed. And so the populace who may disagree with the policies of the leadership of country A are afraid to speak. In this country, country B, those who oppose country B's policies are free to speak. Total political freedom. Country B also, if we were to compare, country A has no religious freedom, freedom of the press, and so forth. Country B has freedom of the press, assembly, religion. And by the way, country B has a complete independent judiciary, which means in country B, the legal system stands outside the government, whereas in country A, the legal system is embodied in the government. Country B has no such thing as religious broadcasts that attack country A. It has a freedom rating. Remember, their freedom rating over here was 6. They have a freedom rating of 1 from Freedom House in 2014. 1.5 in freedom, 2 in civil liberties, and 1 in political liberties. So I've just described two different countries. Country A wants to destroy country B, sends missiles to country B, kills civilians, tortures its opponent, has no freedoms. Country B recognizes country A has a right to exist, never started a war with country A, never. Never targets civilians, unlike country A, has freedom for people to gather and be religious and vote and so forth. Now, if we looked at this as simply two countries and we asked the moral question, and this is a question that needs to be asked. The moral question is, which country is acting in a moral way? And if you list all these, and we sit down and we put together the facts about that, I find it incredible to think that anybody wouldn't say country B is the moral country. And country A is operating in an immoral fashion. So the question is then, which country does nearly every government in the world side with? And here's the astounding thing in our day and age. They're siding with country A. Who am I talking about? You know that. Israel, country B. The Palestinians, or Hamas in Gaza, country A. And when you look at this and step aside and take the names out of it and just say, here's two hypothetical countries, which country would you want to live in? You know, no sane person would ever say, I want to live here. They would all say, I want to live here. This gives you freedom. This is not a country seeking to destroy others. This one seeks to destroy others. No rational, moral human being is going to say, I want to live in this country. But the minute you put names on it, and you say this is Israel, and this is a Palestinian Authority or Gaza, then suddenly the governments of the world say, this country is the one we're going to support. And what is the primary concern of the United Nations? And nearly all the world's media, and unfortunately nearly all the world's intellectuals, it is that country B, who is receiving hundreds of missiles sent from country A, the concern is, we don't want you killing civilians over here. That's the issue in the news. That's the issue in the media. You have no right. You're the moral country, but you have no right to defend yourself by attacking here and civilians get killed. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. You see, the moral gulf between country B and country A is as clear as the moral gulf that existed between the Allies and the Nazis. And one has got to have put their moral sense, their moral compass somewhere else, not to understand that there is a vast gulf here, and it is the gulf that is similar to that. You know, it's clear that while free and democratic countries such as those in Western Europe value the freedom of speech, the value of freedom of assembly and press for themselves, the absence of these freedoms among Israel's enemies means nothing. Nothing to the Europeans, for example, in the way they morally assess the Middle East. I mean, it is the most perplexing of situations. And I think there's answers, and we're going to see if we can address that today. But the gulf is so vast, and moral countries should be lining up with the moral country in the Middle East, but they're not. The big question is why. Can you imagine, listen to this. By the way, the media is in this too. There's no moral focus in the media. They're preoccupied, for example, with how many Gazans, civilians, have died, and with the disparity of the number. Well, you know, I mean, forget that Hamas has attacked Israel. The point is, you know, 1 or 2 Israelis have died in these attacks, but over 110, 120 civilians have died in Gaza. Oh, the disparity of the numbers. Disparity of numbers has nothing to do with making a moral decision. Can you imagine during World War II if the Western press had converged on German hospitals and apartment buildings and repeatedly announced the huge disparity between German civilian deaths and British civilian deaths. You see, they would have found that more than 10 times the number of German civilians were killed as were the British. But did that have anything to do at all with the morality of the British war against Germany? You know, if we had the press then that we have now, they would have gone into cities and said, and filmed all the bombed out buildings in German cities and filmed crying German mothers because their families had been destroyed. And there would have been this move to say, the Allies are wrong because they're killing all these civilians. No, the Allies are involved in a war. By the way, back then there was no attempt to avoid killing civilians. The Israeli military tries to avoid it. It's impossible when Hamas says, put the civilians in the line of fire, which, by the way, is immoral and illegal. But can you imagine going into Germany with that attitude? I mean, you probably would have been tried for treason in America, but no American newspaper ever could have survived suggesting that because more Germans were killed than Allies, that somehow it was an immoral war. So the big question then is why? Why is a decent, free, democratic Israel not being fully supported by decent countries against the genocidal reign of Islam in Hamas? Why are not moral democracies supporting a moral democracy against a movement that wants to destroy moral society? Why is it that in America we don't know this thinking over here hates us just as much? And if Israel were destroyed, we could take out country B and write in America, because this thinking and these kinds of people want to destroy America as much as they want to destroy Israel. What has happened in our education system? That we are unable to make a clear moral decision. It's like we need an awakening where a child among us would say, the emperor has no clothes. This kind of moral skewedness is insanity. But I think there are several reasons, and Dennis Prager comes up with 5 reasons why this is happening. I think it boils down to one. We'll come to that in a minute. The first reason Mr. Prager suggests is that the Western nations have lost their way. We talk about a moral compass, a compass by which you can say, this is the way. I'm following my compass and where to go. And the West has lost its way. It's lost its moral compass. Europe gave up on its values after World War II. And in America, the left, which dominates the media, has given up on America's distinctive values probably sometime after the Vietnam War. In the 60s, a big move to remove the moral compass, to remove the Bible, to remove our faith in God, to get God out of our public discussion, to bring up children through an education system where God and the Bible are put aside for some kind of humanitarian value system, which has actually brought society further down than further up. But most importantly, that has removed the compass. And now we have the American people wandering in the wilderness of contemporary events with no ability to say, this is right and this is wrong. Very interesting. I read recently that the Department of Defense removed in the academies courses of instruction on what constitutes a moral war. They removed it because it had religious overtones, because it all goes back to early church fathers who taught about a just moral war. If there is no just war, then how do we ever decide what's right and wrong? Is it right to defend yourself? See, people, when they're pointing to someone else, will say, you don't have that right. But when it comes to themselves, I like what the ambassador from Israel to the United Nations said repeatedly. No country in the world would accept missiles being fired from another nation into its sovereign territory without responding. I sure hope that would be the case in our nation, though sometimes under the current administration, I wonder if radical groups in Mexico started firing rockets towards Houston or Dallas or San Antonio, how long before our government would send our troops into Mexico to take out those rockets? But we can point at in Israel and say, have restraint. You know, they sent 100 yesterday rockets into Israel. They're only sending 20 today. You know, don't respond so harshly. I want my government to be able to stand up to any group, be it in Cuba, as President Kennedy did, or in Mexico or Canada, if there was a group sending missiles into our country, I hope our government would respond instantly and with no apology to get rid of that threat to the citizens of the United States. Well, the problem, as Dennis Prager says, the West has lost its moral compass. Secondly, he says this, unlike during World War II, there is a United Nations today, and it is dominated by over 50 Islamic countries. Now think about that. You know, the UN is this organization that was designed to bring peace, and by the way, has a constitution, it has laws, and according to the UN, in the United Nations Charter, no nation is to be threatening the existence of another nation. In other words, you can't be a member of the United Nations and your goal as a nation is to destroy another nation. United Nations says we're going to get together and try to maintain peace. Well, how can I maintain peace between two nations if it's acceptable to be threatening to destroy one another? Well, again, no moral compass, we lose our ability to keep that. There are over 50 Islamic nations in the United Nations. And that becomes just an overwhelming majority to vote what? To vote over and over and over and over again about Israel. It really isn't the United Nations anymore. It should be called the United Islamic Nations, of which we're a member. Just my personal opinion, I think it's time that the United States pull out of the United Nations, or at least say we're not going to pay more than our fair share. If the United States only paid its fair share of money into the United Nations would collapse overnight because we pay far more than any other nation in the world. We pay far more than these 50 Islamic nations put together. So why are we paying for an organization that is consisted of this group of people who consistently vote against us and against Israel and against democracy? No, you see, the second reason this goes on, this moral loss and inability to decide between country A and country B, is the UN. The third reason Mr. Prager offers is that the current American president is a product of the post-war leftist morality. Whenever the left is in power, Israel is unpopular at best and loathed at worst. Thus, Israel's best friend today, interestingly, is Canada. Israel's best friend today is Canada. Now, our current administration will say, well, we support Israel, we're in favor of Israel, blah, blah, blah. Well, they say that because most Americans are, and they're going to be in deep trouble if they ever said. But the actions of our president and his Secretary of State have decidedly been against Israel. Canada is the most pro-Israel. Pro-Israel in the world today. Number 4, Mr. Prager suggests, is that the world's news media relentlessly show images of wounded and dead Gazans. Israel, on the other hand, very few pictures are being taken. Now, you know, there is a moral issue here, but there's also one that says, where is the real tragedy today? How come we turn on the news and they're concerned, well, it's 109, it's 110, how many Gazans have been killed in this battle? And I'll explain in next week's broadcast, if I don't get to it today, on what the IDF does to minimize that, for the reason that it's hundreds and not thousands. But that's the news, only because it's Israel. Whatever happened to the news about Syria? Because we're not talking about hundreds in Syria. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. The statistics from July 8th show that as of the beginning of this war, civil war in Syria, over 170,000 people have died. Not 100, not 200. Listen, 100 is tragic if that's your family that's impacted. 170,000 people have been killed in Syria, and I don't hear the left writing about it and condemning about it and the news talking about it all the time. Of this 170,000, 56,495 are civilians. 56,000 civilians. Of that 56,495 civilians, 9,092 are children. Over 9,000 children have been killed in this civil war. And nobody's up in arms about it. Nobody's trying to get resolutions against it. It's not in front of us all the time. We don't have people running up and down the streets picketing what's going on. So when we look at the numbers, we find that it doesn't make sense. And you're going to have to tune in next week as we continue this to come to what I think is the real issue behind the demonization of Israel. This is Pastor Don Long. I'm glad you joined us today. I look forward to continuing this next week.